we assume, suppose the attacker has got an ability to flip a single bit in the secret key by several techniques of fault injections, which has also evolved over the years, and is able to create a bit flip. Now, when you are able to do that, and you again ask your decryption engine in RSA to decrypt, then rather than providing the correct plain text, it produces a faulty plain text, and we denote that as M and M bar respectively. The M stands for the correct faulty plain text, and M bar stands for the wrong plain text. And if you take a sort of, so they mathematically would be essentially denoted by these two equations. And the idea is that if you take a ratio between them, that means between the faulty output and the correct output, then you find a result which depends upon the secret key bit. So therefore, if DI is, for example, 0 or 1, you essentially can verify which of them are true, and from there you have a trivial leakage of the secret key bit. So this attack was subsequently extended for symmetric key ciphers, which was published by Elie Beham and Adi Shamid in Crypto, and showed that although in the previous case it relied upon certain techniques of public key cryptography, but it also can be applied over complex bit manipulations of secret key algorithms like DES at that time and even AES subsequently. So to talk with AE about AES, like with the advent of AES, there were several attacks on AES that were developed, in particular on fault attacks, I would say. So just to kind of, like keep all of us on the same page, AES 120 in particular is a block cipher which has got 10 rounds, where the first 9 rounds has got constituting components like add round key, sub byte, shift rows, mixed columns. And in the last round, you have all of these except the mixed columns. So if you take a block cipher of this nature, or for that matter, any other block cipher, then it can be subjected to fault attacks. So this is essentially showing you the internal to the block cipher. And very much, I would say any block cipher that I take would have these kind of constituting components, which basically provides much needed what are called as confusions and diffusions in the block cipher. So now how does that relate to a fault injection attack? So there are several fault injection techniques that have developed over the years, starting from simple methodologies like clock glitches, voltage glitches, to more fancy equipments like electromagnetic attacks, optical attacks, laser guns, and so on. So now we would basically try to see is that first we will try to take a quick recap about how we can perform a fault attack or a differential fault attack in particular on block ciphers. So in this case, the left diagram shows you the correct execution. That means you take a plain text and you get a fault-free cipher text. And subsequently, when you are again trying to encrypt the same plain text, rather than allowing it to encrypt in a normal conventional environment, you try to create a kind of a perturbation in the environment and hence create a fault injection. So once that fault injection is created, it results in a faulty cipher text. And in a classical sense, you do what is called as a differential fault attack, which tries to analyze the fault-free cipher text and the faulty cipher text to reveal the secret key. So here is a quick, overview why a fault injection attack works. So if you imagine that there is a block cipher for that matter, and there is some way a disturbance which is being created. So the disturbance spreads across through the block cipher, and without going into the particularities about why or what happens exactly, what I would try to kind of highlight is that if you observe, for example, one of the intermediate states, say at this point, which is after the 9th round mixed column of AES, you find that the internal bytes in the AES state matrix has got interrelationships. For example, you can see that this byte is like this byte is twice this byte, and so on. So now these interrelationships imply that there is a shrinkage in the entropy of the state, and that can be exploited for doing an attack. And in fact, these kind of attacks have been done subsequently, and people have shown that you can actually perform, where you can uniquely almost retrieve the key of AES by a double fault injection. And if you do a single fault injection, you can still reduce the key size of AES 128 from 2 power of 128 to around 2 power of 8 values with the time complexity required of around 2 power of 30. So there is a YouTube video also down, which if you're interested, you can have a more elaborate look on how DFA works on AES. But the context in today's discussion is more on trying to develop a methodology to analyze and assess fault injections. In order to do so, the first thing that people talk about when they describe a fault attack is essentially the model that we use for describing the various kinds of faults which are of importance. So the fault models can be of various kinds. For example, they can be bit fault or byte faults. And in general, they are essentially, they fall into a class of faults which are called as random faults. On the contrary, there may be also other kind of faults which are also exploited by attackers, which are called as biased faults, which means that the probability that you will have a 0 getting flipped into 1, or maybe a 1 getting flipped into a 0 is not exactly the same. Likewise, you can also have faults in particular in context to software implementations where there are instructions which are either skipped or they are modified. And finally, an extreme end of, I would say, a bias fault injection would be a stuck at fault, where you have got a bit which is kind of stuck at to 0 or stuck at to 1. So the fault attacks, various kinds of fault attacks have evolved over the years, which tries to kind of, capitalize on these kind of fault models. So, and also to resist these kind of attacks, fault tolerant architectures have also evolved. For example, when we talk about countermeasures to DFA, broadly it can be classified into these two classes, which are called as detection-based countermeasures and infection-based countermeasures. So detection-based countermeasures, as the name suggests, stands by, for application of classical fault tolerance technique to resist these kind of fault attacks, where you try to kind of apply various forms of redundancy like time redundancy, hardware redundancy, information redundancy, and so on, and try to see that whether you can understand that there has been a fault. So there is an explicit comparison to detect the presence of a fault, and then you take your suitable strategies. For example, you can either completely shut down the output, or you can provide a random output so the attacker even doesn't know that there has been a fault injected successfully. On the other hand, there has been another class of countermeasures which have been developed, which are called as infection-based countermeasures, in which there are no explicit comparisons, but it rather tries to disturb the information of a fault by infection, so that although the fault output is provided, but they are not able to kind of correlate it with the secret key. Many often these infection-based countermeasures are pretty complex compared to the detection-based countermeasures. So now the question that we try to kind of address in this presentation is, how can we test block ciphers for fault attacks? So we try to kind of secure crypto devices against fault attacks, and because of that, several countermeasures have developed. And we have seen that although we are, like many of them are pretty resource hungry, they have been still subjected to further attacks. They have been broken. So therefore, right, I mean, this is a constant battle between design and also kind of attacks. So the question is, how do we really know what is secure and what is not? So in order to kind of address this problem, we try to develop a black box testing methodology for fault injections, something like what we have for in the context of side channel attacks, which are called as TVLA tests. So we try to develop a framework which we called as ALAFA, which was an automatic leakage assessment test. And this was more descriptions of this technique can be found out in our DAC 2019 paper. I will try to kind of give an overview behind this analysis in this presentation. So what we try to do here is we take a protected cipher, and we try to kind of do a sort of, I would say, a semi-black box analysis, and then the analysis should be simple, should be based on statistics, and should be algorithmic agnostic. That means it should be applicable for different classes of algorithms and countermeasures. So what we try to develop essentially is, I would say, a black box assessment methodology, which will work for fault attack designs as well as fault attack countermeasures. So now let me try to kind of give an intuition behind this technique. So we know that unlike side channel attacks, where you have got exposure to side channel traces, in the context of fault attacks, an attacker has got access to the cipher or the cipher text. So the cipher text is the influence of the faults and is really the leakage source. Now, there are different ways of kind of exploiting these ciphers. For example, the one that I showed at the beginning are what are called as differential fault attacks, or DFA. And likewise, there are more statistical techniques which are called, there is a recent attack which is called as CIFA, which essentially tries to rather exploit what are called as ineffective faults and try to kind of work only on correct cipher texts. So the question is, right, given these various forms of fault attack methodologies, how do we develop a generic leakage detection framework? So formally, what we have access is to the ciphers, or rather I would say the differentials in the cipher. And the differential in the cipher is a function of course, the plain text and the key, but also on the value of the fault or the fault that has been injected. So now we want to kind of develop a methodology which will try to look at these, like distribution in the ciphertext, and from there would try to assess whether there is a fault leakage. So therefore, right, what we try to kind of, I would say, highlight is this equation where we have got an observable delta C, which is a function of your fault value, which is under, of course, under a specific model. And then you have got the plain text and the key, and it's a complex function of that, which we denote as the leakage function. So now the leakage function in fault attacks can be pretty complex because it also depends upon the mathematically complex cipher that is under play. And therefore the question is, what are the secrets in this case? So of course, when we talk about the secrets, an interesting point would be to note that, of course, the secret is the secret key, but along with the secret key, the fault value is also an equivalent secret. And we can argue this, that leakage of the fault value is also kind of equivalent to or have the same effect as leaking the key. And therefore, we try to develop a framework where we try to use both of these as secret data. That means the key is of course secret, along with it the fault value is also a secret which we try to safeguard. So in a more information theoretic sense, what we can capture these requirements in the form of a mutual information notion. In particular, we can talk about a conditional entropy where an attacker has got access to delta C, and the mutual information of delta C with the fault, given that you have got handled to the public plain text, should be equal to 0. And likewise, the mutual information between delta C and the secret key should also be 0. That means we are talking about, in this case, a perfectly like secure scenario where the delta C, which the attacker is observing, is not revealing any information about either the fault or the secret key. So in this case, in our discussion, I will be talking more with respect to the first one, but we can also use equivalently the second definition for developing this framework. So what we do is, now we basically try to develop like a mutual information framework to detect this leakage. In particular, we would be interested to measure this mutual information. But the challenge is, we do not have detailed knowledge about the countermeasure scheme, or we can assume that maybe we do not have a complete knowledge about the countermeasure scheme. So the insight that we basically try to apply here is that we do not require an accurate estimate, but it is sufficient to kind of estimate that whether this mutual information is non-zero or not. So in this context, we try to apply what is called as a theory of non-interference from probabilistic analysis, program analysis. So we can, very likely would assume that the ciphers that we are trying to analyze are typically probabilistic programs in which there are two different types of inputs. So on one hand, you have got some inputs which can be classified as public inputs, and we give an attribute value of that which we called as low. And likewise, there are some inputs, which is the secret key or the fault, which are given the attribute of high. So we denote as H. So now with this high and low, we observe the output, and the output is also in the public domain. So we give a low attribute to this signal. So now we try to apply a classical non-interference theorem, which basically tries to say that a probabilistic program is non-interfering if and only if the mutual information between the observable output and the input, which is essentially a secret, which is essentially attributed a high value, should be equal to 0. So this is the main requirement of what we call as a non-interference theorem. So now we want to kind of develop a simple way, or I would say an equivalent definition, which can work in a simulation setting. So what we do is we take the probabilistic program algorithm, and then we give two different values of the high signals. For example, we denote it as H, and we denote it as H dash, and we observe the output of this probabilistic program. And we observe here that an output say O, and similarly and observe the output as O dash. And the question is whether the two distributions are equivalent or not. If they are equivalent, then that means that essentially the previous mutual information notion of that of your L dash with H being equal to 0 is maintained. But if you find that these two distributions are different, then that value is non-zero, which indicates that there is a probable leakage. So of course, the advantages here is that this is easy to verify, and there may be many ways of justifying and also testing the equality of these two distributions. So the first methodology that we adopt is by applying what is popularly called as a t-test, which is also used in the context of side chain analysis, where you basically have two distributions and you have got a null hypothesis. And depending upon your confidence level and the threshold that you set, you either accept the hypothesis or you kind of reject the hypothesis. So basically, so for example, we can do a test. The null hypothesis could be that the two means or the means of two distributions are same. So that means the alternate hypothesis would be that their means are not exactly the same. So this essentially means that we can develop now a framework where we take the where we take the protected cipher and rather subject it to two secret values, in this case say two fault values, and obtain two distributions. I denote them as say tau f1 and tau f2, and then we apply the simple t-test to tell whether there is a leakage or whether there is no leakage. And while this essentially is works for many cases, but we observe that there are certain issues in this methodology. For example, the first important issue that we faced was that it can lead to false negatives, and the false negatives can come up because of the fact that this methodology just works by checking the first order moments, whereas there may be discrepancies in the higher order moments. Likewise, it also can be suboptimal, which means that we would probably require more observations than what would be otherwise required. Now, it is important to keep the number of observations small simply because you have got a huge fault space, and therefore if you can make your test for every fault value faster, then that would give you an overall speed up in testing. So, and moreover, like many of the countermeasures that we have, like for example, when we talk about like side chain attack countermeasures like masking, then the order of the masking is kind of what decides the maximum allowable leakage order. But in fault attacks, the issue is the leakage order often depends upon the fault propagation and is of course not kind of a priori available to the tester. So if the security tester makes a wrong choice of the order, then it can lead to a false sense of security. So therefore, right, we try to think about other methodologies, and we came up with we would propose in this particular talk the usage of what we call as deep learning and try to see that whether it suits nicely for this purpose. So what are the advantages of applying deep learning? I would say that there are certain distinct advantages. For example, the deep learning method can be a very powerful tool, as it is renowned to understand the complex interrelations among different features and try to even understand and learn in multivariate scenario. So, and moreover, the deep learning doesn't need any order related information, as we will see in more details in the next part of the presentation. And we also can perform better in noisy scenarios compared to the t-test based approach. So here is the basic idea behind our strategy. So we basically take the neural network and we try to train it by taking two fault values. So the fault values are denoted as secret 1 and secret 2, and then we create two distinct, I would say, test training set, and then we use that training set to train our neural network. Now the neural network gets trained, and finally we basically once the neural network is trained, we take a validation set. So the validation set should be kind of independent of your training set, and then we basically see that whether again, if I subject it to different inputs like different fault inputs, and again ask the neural network to predict its output, then what is the amount of accuracy that we get? In fact, what one may observe that what we just need to understand is that whether the accuracy result is more than that of a random guess. In the random guess, when you have got just two possibilities, your probability should be exactly 0.5. But what we just are interested is to know is that whether our neural network is able to learn something which is better than 0.5, which would indicate that there is some amount of leakage. So therefore, right, although the basic description is pretty simple, but there are many subtle points. For example, what is the sample size that we should work out? What should be our threshold? So as I said, that we would typically try to keep the sample size small because many of the fault attacks actually works with small sample input, but that also implies that our neural network has the problem of getting overfitted. That means it would try to kind of remember the data, and therefore if there are some subtle changes in the input pattern, it would not be able to correctly predict. Likewise, what would be the threshold? So in this case, as I will talk about, like we again resort to statistical t-test and use that as a means of setting the threshold. And the other question would be what should be an ideal model selection and how do we rather interpret the result, because we are interested to know, for example, what are the fault points which are, like, which can potentially leak. We are interested in also knowing that whether it's a single variate leakage or a multivariate leakage, which means that whether an attack can work if only one point is faulted, or whether an attack can work if there are multiple points which are simultaneously faulted. So the deep learning model, the lucky part, I would say the advantage from our end is that we really do not need a fancy deep learning technique, because what we just need to ensure is that the leakage assessment need not be the best, but it should be able to understand that whether the learning is something better than a random learning. But we must be careful that the model must avoid overfitting, and therefore we try to kind of adopt certain methodologies in our deep learning model so that it doesn't overfit. In particular, I show here two models that are very popular in fault attacks. For example, one is the bitwise faults, and we found the other one is the bytewise fault. So these are essentially examples of, like the different models. So we basically try to kind of adapt our model, the neural network, depending upon the underlying fault model. So for example, when we talk about the bitewise fault model, we take, like a deep learning network, or I would say a neural network, where we have got one input layer along with two fully connected hidden layer, and finally there are there is an output layer. So typically the number of nodes or neurons that we allow here, or we have here, are something like 32, 16, and finally there are 2 neurons. So now we also apply several techniques like batch normalization and so on, basically trying to kind of ensure that there are no overfitting in our learning process. So there is also another thing that we try to apply, in particular in the context of interpretation. So for example, we need the interpretation because we want to ensure that the model, because when we are basically training the neural network, the neural network may learn certain leaky features and may neglect others, and therefore there is always a potential that we will not be able to know some of the faulty points, and therefore we may end up in a wrong conclusion. So we want to know what are kind of all the leakage points. We want to expose all the leakage points. And likewise, we also are interested in knowing that whether the leakage is univariate or multivariate, which means that whether the fault attack will work if only a single point is faulted, or whether we need a combination of points to be faulted to reveal the secret key. So in order to do that, we adopt a strategy from machine learning, which is called as sensitivity analysis. And the sensitivity analysis basically tries to compute this function, which is essentially trying to kind of capture how much the output class would change. I mean, the classification would change if we made a small variation in a specific input byte pattern. So for example, in this case, Y0 stands for the first output of the model, and Xi would stand for the ith input of the model. So suppose if we are talking about a byte fault model, then it would mean the ith byte of your input pattern. And likewise, we basically compute this to find out that if there is a small perturbation made to this feature, then how much does it affect your output classification? So what we do subsequently is that in this sensitivity analysis step, we basically find out the IM values, and we kind of rank them, and we compute the average of these ranks, and that essentially is my threshold. So all those input byte patterns which are above this threshold, we keep them as important, I would say, like important features. And what we then try to do is twofold strategy. By first, we are interested in, say, to find out all the leakage features. So what we do is we kind of redo the experiment by replacing all these features with 0. And so that means the moment I do that, then I am essentially still probably left with some other features which essentially have got, although they have got the IMI values less than the threshold, but they potentially can still lead to attack. So we basically try to evaluate that whether it can lead to a classification which is better than a random guess, and that would imply that they are also important. I mean, although their IMI values are small, but they still can be exploited by an attacker. If not, then we are happy because we know that they cannot be exploited. We also try to do a multivariate or univariate analysis, which is a slight change over this technique. What we do is we kind of rather eliminating all of them which are above the threshold, which we did in the previous case when we are trying to find out the leaky features. In this case, we eliminate one by one, and we try to see that whether it still can, lead to a leakage when you are, say, left with only univariate features. So I will try to present a case study. I mean, the case study is basically a simple countermeasure which is based on detection. Rather, I would say it's a detection which is based on error correction codes. So in what we do here is that we basically do a normal operation, but when you are doing this operation, you kind of compute what is as simple as that, like computing the parity. And then you also predict this parity. And finally, you check that whether this parity is maintained. So this is a very simple technique which is often adopted by several countermeasures. In particular, one can completely write the AES structure using this parity. So you can write a parity-based code for AES. And this is essentially one of the targets that we analyze using our framework. So now let me give an overview, I would say pictographic overview. So what we do is we take the encryption. So imagine that this is this countermeasure that we just now talked about, and we subject it to two fault values, and we create two sets of faulty ciphertext. So let us denote it as F0 and F1. And now we take this faulty ciphertext and create a database. So these database have got binary labels of 0 and 1. And then we create what is called as a k-fold cross validation. So we basically have got k sets. And what we do is that we kind of train on the remaining k minus the first, say chosen k minus 1 subset, and we validate on the other one. So we have got, in that case, k trainings that we perform. So likewise, we train our neural network. And because we are doing k trainings, and finally we test on each of these k validation sets, we have got k individual validation accuracies. So let us denote them from A0 to AK minus 1. What we are now interested to see is that whether this accuracy that we get is better than that of a random guess. And in order to do that, we again adopt to the t-test. So we make a null hypothesis saying that the mean of our average is more than 0.5. So we either accept this hypothesis or we reject this hypothesis. So in this case, what we can see here, for example, the first one is an example of this detection-based countermeasure that I just mentioned. And you can see that the threshold being set at something like 4.5, you get a consistent leakage both for your normal t-test based technique, which I previously described, which was called as ALAFA, as well as for the DL-Fallout test. Interestingly, the next graph, you can see that this is an infection-based countermeasure based on an old Latin crypt paper in 2012. And you can see that while ALAFA is not able to really understand the leakage quite fast, but our deep learning based framework is able to learn it even faster. So likewise, you can also, like talking about the sensitivity analysis. So there are two class of graphs that I describe here. The first one is what is called as an infection countermeasure, and the second one is what is called as a detection countermeasure. So in the infection countermeasure, as you can see probably, is that we have identified certain like points which are like shown as 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is the threshold. So we basically use the sensitivity analysis to know that which of the bytes are important, and if they're above the threshold, then we consider them as significant. And likewise, what we do in the next run is we remove these important features and we again run the test. Now, if the test is still able to give some significant sensitivity values, for example, in this case, it is 12, 13, 14, and 15, then you know that even they are also, I would say, sensitive variables. So then what you do is you again remove them and again rerun. Likewise, you again observe another tuple and likewise again another tuple. So then you are able to identify all the, I would say, the important points where an attack, on which a fault attack can work. So likewise, if you see the other graph, you can see that this, in this case, we are interested in knowing the multivariate analysis to kind of identify whether the attack is or leakage is multivariate or not. So initially we start with this, for example, this set of 12, 13, 14, 15, and then we start removing one of the features at one time. For example, from 12, 13, 14, 15, we go to 13, 14, 15 and still see a leakage. But when we are going from 13, 14, 15 to say only 14 and 15, then we are not seeing the leakage, which indicates that this is indeed a multivariate leakage, because the moment you go, and it's a multivariate of order 3, because 3 bytes are essentially leaking here. And when you go to a single byte, then you don't see the leakage, which implies that it is a multivariate leakage. Likewise, this is an example of the detection countermeasure. Again, we are trying to identify the important features. And here you can see it's a univariate leakage, because even if you are going to 1 byte, you still see a consistent leakage to indicate that the detection-based countermeasure is vulnerable against a univariate fault attack. So likewise, there are some more use cases that we depict here. Again, a similar adopt strategy, and these are some more I would say recent countermeasures. Like the first one is a Rimben countermeasure, which was published in IEEE TIFFs in 2016, which is a class of infective countermeasure interesting, you can see that the t-test based alpha is not able to detect the leakage here, but the DLFaLAT or the deep learning based framework is able to detect. The second one shows a more recent CIFA countermeasure that we worked on published again in TIFFs, and we show that there is no leakage and kind of try to kind of assess it by this framework. So to conclude my talk, I think what I tried to present is that countermeasures are essential to protect ciphers against fault attacks. What we proposed is a deep learning assisted leakage detection test, which is called as DLFaLAT. And what we try to kind of suggest here that this test can filter out malformed designs. It can point out vulnerabilities, and we also believe that it is applicable to state-of-the-art fault injection techniques like CIFA. We are of course so this is, I would say, like the second part of if we want to develop a test methodology, then there are two parts. One is in particular with respect to faults. One is how do you sensitize those those fault values, and how do you kind of evaluate those fault values to see that whether there is a leakage. We have rather worked on the second part, where we have shown how we can develop a leakage assessment in context to fault attacks. We are now also trying to develop these tools so that we can work with an optimal fault set to ensure a high test coverage. So with this, I would like to kind of thank you all for your attention. And if there are any questions, I would be very happy to answer.
Thank you, Devdeep, for this talk. It was very interesting. So I encourage our audience to please type in your questions if you have any. You can use both Q&A as well as chat. In the meantime, I actually have two questions to ask. The first one is when you were talking about multivariate leakages, was it more can you please explain again, like what do you imply by that? Is it multiple faults or the propagation of the fault that you're talking about?
Right. So let me give this example. So for example, here, if you observe this countermeasure, which is an infection countermeasure, so you can see that if you look at this trace, you will see that I'm talking about certain byte positions where the fault has taken place, like say 12, 13, 14, and 15, right? So if the fault takes place at these points, then I'm seeing a leakage, as you can see by this graph. But if I start reducing the fault locations, for example, here I reduced it to 13, 14, 15, I still find a leakage. But if I reduce it by one more step, then I don't see the leakage, which means now that if I now go and corroborate it with the actual fault attack, because there was a fault attack which was also published against this countermeasure, you can see that you can actually still do the attack if there are 3 bytes which are faulted, but not less than that. So therefore, we say that the order of this fault attack is 3.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this question coincidentally was also from Bodhisattva Mazumdar, who also has another question. So what he would like to ask is the effort level for training model higher in a multi-byte fault as compared to a single byte fault?
Okay, so it's a good question. I mean, right now I would say that when you are training, right? I mean, essentially, what you do is you create 2 fault values, and you basically have got the cipher that essentially is exposed to the adversary. So now what you are basically trying to do is you are trying to partition them into 2 bins, and you are basically training your in your neural network with these two classes of cipher. So I don't anticipate that it will really vary upon whether the eventual fault leakage is a multivariate or a single variate. But yeah, I mean, I would say rather I don't see any dependence as of now.
And before concluding, I actually have one very generic question regarding all the talks that was presented today. So we saw in the first talk that like side channel was used to actually detect hardware trojan using machine learning techniques. And then in the second talk, it was used towards key recovery, and in this one, it was used more at the ciphertext level to actually find vulnerabilities against fault attack. Do you see like if there are opportunities that like some automation techniques can be developed based on these machine learning and deep learning techniques that can actually consolidate all these evaluation into a single framework.
I mean, I would say that that is the ultimate goal, right? I mean, we basically, as at the end of the day, even when we are doing attacks, right, we are more interested in developing secure designs. So for, I would say, like, automation is really indeed the ideal thing that we would like to achieve, or like we attain. And many of the, if you see, for example, like I was following Sylvan's talk, and maybe Sylvan can correct me if he's there, and even Stephen's talk. I mean, all of them has got many similarities, right? I mean, essentially, and I think that information theory is one way of kind of homogenizing all of these, and that can help us to probably develop very efficient tools. But of course, it would require further research, and a tool will never replace human, but definitely help us in the flow, in the design flow.
Thank you, Devdev, for this interesting talk. So.